Hello and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Collaborate Global, Digital Event News and Exhibition News. My name is Martin Fullard and I'm the Editorial Director at m.i.c.e. Now, today's session is called Delivering the World, Planning Events Post-COVID, and we have got some great content for you. Now, Collaborate Global is an events agency with offices in the UK and South Africa, and today they're going to be sharing the trials, tribulations, and learning from the last year of delivering virtual and hybrid events internationally. Now, our speakers, who I'm going to introduce in a moment, will look at creating a more sustainable future for global events and talk through logistical challenges that have been forced upon the sector. They're going to provide you with some useful real-world insights and some valuable takeaways for your future events. They'll be touching on things like bringing a global audience together into the room virtually, driving engagement through cultural barriers, managing time zones, and of course offering tips on reducing the carbon footprint. So guiding us through this journey is Collaborate's very own Head of Project Delivery, Ross Oxenham, and Chris Ambridge, an Executive Producer. Now, a little bit about our speakers. Based in South Africa, Ross was planning and delivering global events from home before it was made the norm, or cool, as I'm sure he'd insist. He's executed virtual, hybrid and physical events internationally for some of the world's biggest brands. He's got a wealth of knowledge of the logistical challenges it takes to operate on a global scale. As far as Chris is concerned, having completed recently a 5-day international hybrid with over 37 countries in attendance, he's got a fresh insight into the trials and tribulations and, of course, the wins of what turns a global event into a success. With a rich agency history working with globally respected brands, Chris brings a deep understanding of planning, executing and measuring the success of international events. But that's enough gassing from me. There's going to be time for questions at the end, so please don't be shy. Pop them in the Q&A box and we have got a 10-minute window at the end to get through them. Ross and Chris, over to you.
Hi guys, my name is Ross Oxenham and I head up global delivery for Collaborate Global. I'm currently based in Quebec, South Africa, previously known as Port Elizabeth. Having moved here 2.5 years ago with my family of my wife and my 2 kids, after spending 11 exciting years in London, of which part of this time was used and helped to kind of build Collaborate Global. Chris, my esteemed colleague to the left or right-hand side of me, has been a massive part of our business over the past 9 months. And he has been an absolute value add with his strategic approach to events. So I've invited him this morning to share some of his insights. Chris, a quick word from you.
Thank you, Ross. You are too kind. My name's Chris. I'm an executive producer for Collaborate Global. I have a really broad marketing background. So I've worked at a number of large and small integrated agencies across brand activation, experiential campaigns, and also internal communication. I'm actually based in London, although sometimes it really does feel like I'm based in South Africa with Ross too, because we talk on a daily basis over these kind of Zoom calls, if not several times a day. Today, for this particular session, we really want to share our experience and our thoughts on delivering the world. So planning events in a post-COVID environment. And there are 4 key areas really we want to cover off. So the first one is around building the narrative for global events and how we start to approach that now and how that's changed and where it's changed and where it hasn't changed. How we can drive engagement for delegates and consumers in the virtual world. How we plan the logistics around the events. And also our very, very top line thoughts on the future of global events. We are by no means experts, but these are our insights based on our experience over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. And actually just on that note, Ross, it's been a hell of a year, right? So what have the highlights and the lowlights been for you over the last 12 months? So it feels like 12 years, 12 months.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Geez, yeah, flip. What a time. But let's not focus on that. I think just to kind of set the scene, if I look back to sort of the last 18 months, going back to, probably March last year when this sort of all started to surface, I was actually on my way back from an event with one of our main clients, key clients in Miami. We were both on our way back to London and waiting for our flight. It was all high fives and beers. Obviously, I'm big fan of beer. We won't focus on that. And the discussion while awaiting our next flight was around a stacked pipeline. And I think the only thing to kind of interject, the conversation shifted at one point of to the odd sighting of a random passenger wearing a face mask. Fast track a month or even 3 weeks later, all the borders were shut. Working from home, although we'd adopted that early as a company, was the standard. And the same client that was high-fiving me a few weeks prior was putting projects quicker than ever. So I think after taking a few days of, and a handful of inspirational TEDx videos, we as an SMT sat around the table and discussed our approach for the rest of the year. Despite the challenges that everyone in this virtual room are all aware of, we really wanted to focus on activation and communication solutions that we'd already started talking about and rolling out, be it at a smaller level over in years prior, but ultimately use some of these tools to help our clients and respective brands get their messages out in keyword new normal.
And there's an interesting point there, right? Because Collaborate we're already using technology to enhance the physical experience at live events, right? So you didn't have to pivot completely because of COVID. You were building on the technology, the solutions, and partners that you already had, right? Just to deliver a slightly different experience. And with that in mind, how did you kind of communicate that to your existing client base by way of saying, look, we've got this covered, guys, as well as taking the message to a prospective customer base? I mean, how did you straddle that divide?
Yeah, Chris, I think that was one of our challenges, because I think we never really captured it as a case study. We had sort of reference points, but we just needed a really strong statement. So I think the main, and it was actually a highlight for us last year, I think one of the main points is we actually did our own hybrid event. We ran it mid-July, I think it was about the 16th. And we basically partnered with one of our main automotive clients and a pharma tech company, multinational, that we've done a lot of work with previously. And we successfully delivered an internally funded hybrid event. I think it turned into a resounding success and really helped not just us as a business. It's been our wider freelance team to gather pace and confidence. It was a really strong proposition for us, and used as a talking point ever since. But I think, Chris,
effectively it was a showcase for what you could achieve, right? And the art of the possible within hybrid events post-COVID.
Completely. And I think that's exactly what it did. And I think I go back to that point about using our wider freelance team, building confidence in new clients as a really strong talking point. So it was a really good piece for us. So yeah, I think that was a resounding success, from the lowlights in 2 weeks after Miami Airport to the highlights of delivering our first internal funded hybrid event. That has been a talking point, as I said, ever since. But I think one thing for us, Chris, is to not get lost in the past 18 months, but talk about some of the exciting information that you're going to share with us, and I'm going to contribute to. So I think it's over to you.
Let's go. So I think our starting point, as with any event, right, is how can you build a strong story or a narrative? And that became more important than ever, I think, kind of post-COVID, when we were planning events. What's the narrative that you can build that effectively transcends borders or can transcend cultural differences? What are the universal elements that will appeal to all the delegates, or all the attendees? And arguably for virtual events, I think you need to work even harder to ensure that narrative is inclusive of the different markets attending, because obviously you just can't rely on everyone being in the same room. And I think that's where, as an organization, we really wanted to go beyond just production delivery to help our clients with some strategic guidance around shaping content that could stretch a little bit further than maybe it would if you were just relying on having 200 or 500 or 1,000 people in the same room for a plenary, right?
So Chris, with that being said, what is, I think, go right back to the thing, what is the starting point for some of our recent delivery pieces that we've been involved in the last year?
I think, so one of the first events that we actually ran together kind of post-COVID in lockdown was a corporate event for a large, huge multinational client. And our starting point with them, it was the first event we were running for them. So our starting point was understanding the business context, and that was both historical and political. And then underneath that, you kind of had the basic logistical constraints that sat behind that. But it sound like big words. What do I mean by that? Well, from a historical perspective, what was happening in the organization at the time? Were there any pivotal business changes that were due to take place in that organization across the next 6 months? And there was a significant merger taking place. What had been communicated at the last key event for this group of people? What would work well and what hadn't worked well? And so some of these are kind of basic questions that would be your starting point anyway, but it became really important for us to really understand culturally what was driving the need for this event. And then politically, what were the sensitivities that needed navigating? So was there a change of leadership? Was there a team restructuring? Who were the stakeholders that needed to be consulted and engaged throughout that process? And those kind of two historical and political factors then helped us understand what some of the top line logistical constraints were going to be as well. So, how many people therefore needed to speak over what period of time? How many different countries were being engaged across which time zones? I mean, I think the first thing I did when we spoke to Ross, and I think he did the same, is like get an A4 sheet of paper and go, okay, so hang on, it's 12 p.m. GMT, and we've got East Coast America and Mexico one side, and then we've got Asia and Japan the other side. So what are the time zones that we're operating within for any live broadcast?
Chris, I think since moving back to South Africa, that's just been the story of my life. Looking at different time zones. My favorite part of the year is daylight saving, when you guys get an hour closer to me.
Yeah,
so
exactly. I
really kind of take on board that. I think these are really sort of interesting talking points. And if we look at historical, political, logistical constraints, how can these contributing factors help build the narrative?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think once we knew some of the answers, and once we kind of understood, if you like, the context, we were then able to help shape and frame the narrative and the content. So, okay, we knew that because of the number of people that needed to speak, we needed a 5-day event, right?
Yep.
We knew that because of those different time zones we spoke about, we needed to broadcast for 2 to 3 hours each day, probably in the middle of the day, from 12 p.m. GMT onwards. And if we were doing that over the course of 5 days, we knew we needed a strong story to maintain interest and relevance and keep people coming back. So, we asked some, again, obvious but key questions to help shape the brief together. What was the overarching theme for the event? What do they want to say? What do they want delegates to feel during the event? What do we want delegates to say about the event after it? How are we measuring success, and what are the barriers to success? And again, some of this seems like really obvious, right? But they're very useful conversations to have with the clients as well, because it helps shape their thinking. And once you've done that, we could then identify where the peaks needed to be. So almost, we took to thinking of it as if it was a Netflix series, for argument's sake. What are the narrative peaks and troughs, right? So we knew we needed something strong, to grab people's attention on day one. Great. We plan a team building event for the end of day one. We know that we need some kind of wow moment that's going to maintain interest by say day 3, by midway. So what can we deliver that's got some technical brilliance that gets people talking? And then obviously the next kind of main peak is how can we end on a high? What's the grand finale that could include all the delegates on day 5? So we kind of started to think about it creatively in that sense. What are the kind of ebbs and flows and peaks and troughs to really kind of deliver these wow moments and make it as engaging a story as possible. Every story, plays, films, books, whatever, have a beginning, a middle, and end. They tend to work in 3 acts. So what was our 3-act structure for this 5-day global event?
So, Chris, that's a really good starting point for building the narrative around a global event. I think moving on to our next point, driving engagement, how can you maximize engagement when there may be cultural barriers, differences that need considering? And then secondly, you can't get everyone in the same space. So how do you best use technology to facilitate a successful delivery?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the use of technology, however you use it, has to be used with purpose. You shouldn't be using technology for technology's sake, right? It has to be kind of driving the story, driving the narrative. And then within that context, certainly with the event we were speaking about before, we really challenged ourselves to think about the best means of driving engagement. So if the event is in the English language, what mechanics can we put in place that are easy for everyone to understand and engage in, especially for a lot of delegates for whom English was a second language. And how can you then build up levels of engagement throughout the course of, say, a 5-day event? Because just as some people are shy in real life, they're also shy in terms of responding to chat and getting involved in chat functionality, giving feedback in breakout groups or workshop sessions. So these were kind of key questions we were trying to answer. And one question that kept coming up again and again as well was, what's the closest to that moment you used to get in the real world, the physical world of events of, the meeting the CEO at the bar moment, which sometimes the CEO says they love and sometimes clearly they hate, right? But, how could you create that opportunity for random connections and random meetings between people who wouldn't ordinarily have that chance? How can you do that in a virtual event world?
Chris, I think that's a really good point. I think a really good example from the second event we did for that client was an awards event that we did for them, and it was based in, the majority of the attendees were based in Europe, but traditionally they would meet in a hotel room, as you mentioned. And this year they targeted us with creating almost a UK-based experience. So we created a mechanic that we felt would work for that event, was doing a guided tour with someone I wasn't as familiar of, but after meeting him and talking about him, it's clear that he is quite famous, which was Mark Berry, aka Bez. He kind of took
Happy Mondays. I mean, he's a legend. He's going to be rooted in Britpop or indie 90s indie history to understand who he is. But yeah, he's a legend.
So I think that was a resounding success, and it wasn't necessarily the guided tour that he did for us, which was pre-recorded in this case, or even the live hosting, which he added absolute value. But I think for me, it was after the event or the main stage, the main activation was finished. There was a breakout, almost like a backstage breakout session that I'd suggested to the client of just having as a wrap up, and almost just have, share a beer and just get everyone's thoughts and around the table essentially. And we'd spoken to Bez prior to this and saying, look, can we book you for another hour and a half just to kind of drop into the session and just have a really informal chat? And looking at the success and post-event, the client absolutely loved it, and the attendees, it was a highlight for all of them. So I think you make a really, really good point, and that just for me was an example that really, really worked in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's a great example. We did something similar for the first event, and this is going to sound like we just organised, tour guides for people, but because it was a global event where one of the key parts of the company was based in Japan. We gave all delegates a tour of Tokyo. That's something very, very similar, where we found an external speaker and host who was able to give a tour of Tokyo that was brilliant, a virtual tour. But we pre-recorded that, and then when we broadcast, we had him available live on the chat function to respond to questions and comments from all the delegates. The hop-in platform that we use for this particular event has a fantastic chat function. And so when he was talking, and there was an obvious suspension of belief, right? Because the delegates knew that one piece was pre-recorded, but whilst he was talking, they were also saying, wow, that place looks amazing. Oh, I'd love to get raw tuna from the fish market. And he was responding, saying, oh, hey, Chris, yeah, I'd love to show you around when you come here. And he was able to interact in real time. And I think in terms of driving levels of engagement, that was so important. That was one of kind of the high points for the event we ran in terms of the number of comments, the number of chat comments and interaction. So I think a key learning for us was to, if you have it, maximize the chat function by treating it as an additional engagement platform, almost the same way that the big brands will build social media content and build a social media calendar. So we were looking at the planned content over the course of the 5 days and saying, okay, what scheduled chat comments could we prep in advance or prepare and think about that would accompany the content being presented? What proportion would be pre-prepared effectively, and what proportion would just be live reaction? And for the pre-prepared, how could we use the poll functionality as well to drive feedback and drive delegate engagement. And also, again, we structured it to almost as a growing narrative, because we knew that some people might be a little shy at first or might not want to get too involved in the chat function. So how could we build the content over the course of the 5 days to a point where it's very easy? There were some easy entry questions for delegates. Oh, how are you feeling? Welcome. What did you think of that? So then building it up to perhaps more business targeted questions that were very specific to the content of the event itself, that enabled the organizers, the company, to be able to get some insights in terms of what their employees really thought about certain topics within the organization. So it kind of had a dual functionality.
I think, Chris, as well, just to kind of now almost, I don't want to use it, flip it on its head, but from an attendee feedback perspective, one piece of content or one guest speaker that we brought in, and the lovely Mary, who I know our creative head took a great liking to, but he might kill me for saying this. She was a great guest speaker, and I think she was really professional and used to really use some of these mechanics. Can you like push that example a bit?
Yeah, and I think we work very closely with her. So she's a professional speaker. I mean, she's an analyst for Gartner, but she does a lot of public speaking. And so we were able to work very closely with her, where she said, okay, I really want to prompt feedback from the audience. I really want to be able to get their insights and inputs and then react to them in real time. So we worked closely with her to build out her content. So when she asked a question in the presentation live, we were also posting that question or posting a poll. And she was able to see the comments coming in real time and respond to those. Now, that doesn't work with all speakers, obviously, but she was extremely skilled and experienced in public speaking. And again, it was brilliant. It was a real highlight in terms of a moment of interaction and engagement, and one of the key points for a lot of delegates in terms of the feedback we got afterwards from that, because it makes them feel like they're being heard and they've got a voice, right? And I think that same philosophy needs to be applied to breakout sessions as well.
Yeah, completely.
That was almost a plenary session, but if you adopt the same philosophy for breakout sessions, to mix up your delegates, have a discussion lead as you normally would, but also have a second nominated support. And again, you're not going to get everyone kind of necessarily raising their hand and feeling free to speak up in those breakout sessions. So use the chat function to try and prompt that a little bit and prompt some feedback if they don't want to speak on screen, or maybe their boss is there and they feel uncomfortable. But actually, the really important thing what we did, I thought that worked extremely well, is after the breakout sessions, we then brought 2 or 3 of the leads from different breakout sessions back onto the main stage and broadcast them live effectively, giving highlights and a recap of the insights and inputs they had gathered in their breakout session. And again, what that did is it made all of the delegates feel like their voice was being heard.
I think, Chris, that was,
yeah.
I was just going to say, I think that really, it really helps drive engagement. But I think from an even authenticity, we've spoken about pre-recorded content and how valuable that is and how that really, helps from a creative perspective. But I think in helping attendees see the authenticity around that sort of live interaction, it really helped from that perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if we were to say around our hints and tips around driving engagement, absolutely use where you can use chat functionality to build engagement over time, and try and plan the content in a way that a social media agency might plan content, or a comms agency. So what are my live reaction, and make sure you've got someone dedicated for that, obviously, not just someone who's doing it, on the side of organizing the event in real time, show calling in real time. What are the live responses going to be? What are the pre-planned responses, and how can we build on those? Are there any polls? How does the content, the chat content, feed into the content that's being presented? Are there any presenters who are skilled enough to be able to react in real time to comments that are coming up on screen? And how can you prep for that? And also, how can you manage a hybrid world where maybe you have a pre-recorded presentation, but someone responsible for that presentation also asking questions and being the guest chat owner, if you like, when that's being broadcast. and it becomes a second screen functionality, which
completely
which
agree.
so many people love. So I mean that's one key point for us. I think another is, considering virtual team building events that can transcend cultural challenges as well. Team building is a big part of many events, getting people to mix together. So, and there's some brilliant tools and games available online and people who host those that can get people working together. And again, sounds really obvious, trying to implement tasks that can drive talkability and interaction between colleagues, and even if they're strangers. So you want people to come away from a team building event or from a tour of Tokyo and say, oh wow, that was brilliant. What about that? Oh my God, that cafe where the pet micro pigs are running around, isn't that amazing? And what are those small moments that create the spark amongst people who may not know each other, or who are trying to generate better working relationships despite the fact they're separated by thousands of miles and a laptop screen.
I think it's also fair to say that even if this didn't, I think you and I could just create own little side business or world of doing city tours. I think we'd nail those personally.
Definitely. It was, we learned so much doing it. And actually we'll talk about this later, but the learnings are how can you then start to translate some of those insights into the post-COVID world, into events when people do start meeting, big groups of people do start meeting. Can you create or recreate the chat functionality so people can, without losing interest or not paying attention, can comment on what they're seeing in real time. And we've seen that technology before with live events. Even if it was just a hashtag for a consumer event. But there were some really valuable insights in terms of human behavior and what people got out of it. And obviously we're measuring everything in terms of metrics as well. So we can see what works and what doesn't work and what we want to build on moving forward. And that for us is a key part in terms of the engagement piece feeds into the narrative piece we were talking about earlier. Okay, Ross, so I want to grill you on your specialist topic now, in terms of logistics. So, where to start, right? What are some of the logistical constraints around global audiences for digital events?
I think, Chris, good point. Where do we start? I think the fundamentals of delivery have not changed. I think for me personally, delivering both globally and virtually over the past few months, there's probably just been a few more challenges that have been thrown into the mix. So for example, if you look at sort of the client journey and with a sort of delivery team, if you look at the client, for example, there's been a lot more associated challenges over the last 12 months. I think the global uncertainty, which I think in the UK in particular, we're starting to maybe see a bit more optimism, but that uncertainty is just transcended through business and big multinationals. So for instance, of the journey from getting from a concept to PO is really, really hard. Uncertainty around budget sign-off and the fear of the unknown. So if you take that, this client that we keep referring back to, if you remember the first time we started speaking about them, just from a cost perspective, they were naturally comparing us to a traditional hotel, or taking a hotel over for two days, and helping convert the costs associated with building a production studio and helping them to not only for themselves understand that the value, but help push that to their sort of various stakeholders was a challenge. So I think for us, that as I said, that concept from the idea from getting from concept to PO was hard, and that internally puts a lot of pressure on our production teams to actually deliver.
Yeah, there's an educational journey that you're taking clients on, right? And I know we have to go through that. So, and with that in mind, if you can't, so once you've taken the client on that journey, you've educated them that actually it's not going to be cheaper, or not necessarily going to be cheaper than previous events in the real world, because there are different costs associated with that. And I remember having a conversation quite painfully with procurement. If you've been on that journey, but you can't get people in the same space, physically in the same space. So what do you then need logistically to create the event itself? Can you get some people together for content creation or for filming? Do you do that with green screen? I mean, how did you kind of approach that logistical process?
So, the second point that I'd mentioned about the delivery team, I think one thing, just going back to us as Collaborate Global, one thing, the way we were set up is we're a really small company. Follow me on this because I'll get to your point. We're a really small company, but we've really put a focus on bringing in the best of class to deliver. So we've put in a substantial amount of investment into our freelance pool across the EU, the US, and the UK. So I think building a strong team with local pots or local resource in each market really helped us. So if we look at the geographical considerations on that last project, we looked at where the speaker's based. So we had speakers based. We knew that the client was based in Geneva. So a lot of because it was an internal communications piece, a lot of the speakers naturally came out of Geneva. So we had to build a studio out there. So any pre-recorded content was shot out in Geneva. And we had really strong, we couldn't travel. Well, I couldn't travel out of South Africa, and naturally our CD and some of our traditional directors and operatives couldn't travel out of the UK. So we had to build a completely Swiss-based, Geneva-based delivery team to capture that content. So we built a studio in Geneva and we brought a really strong producer. You then translate to how the communication was consumed. So we had attendees that were based all across EU, some parts of Asia, and some parts of Iran, which I'll kind of get onto some of the challenges associated with that a little later on. We then looked to kind of run the broadcast and the main broadcast and the MCR out of one of our traditional partners based in the UK. We had live guest speakers coming in from parts of Europe. We had Mary, who was based out in Barcelona, and we had a few, one out of Japan and one out of the US. So having a really sort of strong MCR and a trusted technical partner being based in the UK was a strong point for us. You then look at where the consumers and the attendees are based, and they were based, as I said, all across Europe. There were parts in Africa, US, and the global audience. So the platform that we used was one that could transcend all those borders, albeit two of them that caused a little bit of a challenge for us. But
brand was an issue, I think, from an IP perspective, right?
Completely, yeah. So I think for us it was really just building that strong team with that kind of made the client sitting in Geneva comfortable that they were at arm's length of delivery, if that makes sense, especially given the journey that I alluded to previously. So I think for us that was a really strong point for us, and I think it really helps us as a business with our delivery and our focus that we place on localized resource.
Because look, right, you're only ever as good as the people around you, right? Which is why I love working with you, Ross. But with all that in place, how do you then elevate the event beyond just another Zoom call or a Teams chat, right? Because you've taken the clients on this journey. You've demonstrated to them you've got this global reach and this network of global partners. But their biggest fear is they're spending a considerable sum of money on what is going to be broadcast, and without them having seen it before, the initial leap of the imagination they tend to make is, well, is it just going to be another Teams call? We could do that ourselves.
I think, Chris, yeah, it's and I by no means am here to slate Zoom or Teams, because they're fantastic. I mean, they're incredible. They've run my life certainly for the last 2.5 years. But in the right sort of translation, or the right sort of strategic approach that we take with the client, they may not meet all the delivery needs that us and the client need, and they may not be best placed to kind of deliver. So you mentioned one earlier, Hopin, that we used. And for us, it just ticked all the boxes. It helped drive engagement. It helped with the enhanced chat and polling functionality. It really sort of helped us. There are a number of pros and cons to all of these. We don't just necessarily hang our hats on with Hopin, although they have been a great partner for us. But I think in the right translation, it helps, and it really just elevates from a traditional Zoom or Teams chat. And I think part of that engagement piece is, we know there's such thing as Zoom or Teams burnout. It's a reality. So for us, getting an attendee onto a platform that's just another Zoom meeting in their calendar is an immediate barrier. It's immediate thing that stops in their calendar going, oh, well. And although the journey, and we can talk about this from a technical perspective of getting guys onto that platform, has caused some issues, I think I'd hang my hats on 90% of the guests that have been on that platform, despite all the technical challenges. It's been a resounding, a strong success for us.
Yeah, and I think the key point there for me is, if you want to try and deliver Netflix style content, and I use Netflix just as an analogy, obviously, sadly we don't have Netflix budgets, but if you want to try and deliver content that builds, that's engaging, that feels like it's got a story behind it, you need a platform to deliver that on as well, that feels different. Yeah. And it's white labeled, it's got the client's logo on, it's got some intro blurb on, it feels like something special and differentiated. But with that in mind, presumably you also face some, specific or kind of some unusual challenges around global digital audiences.
Cool. So I think the example that we were all referring to is, naturally we had audience in mainland China and in the Middle East, Iran in particular, and they put blocks on certain platforms, and it's something we spoke to the clients about. And I think we had a stringent, you can remember me tearing my hair out with this, with the security protocol around delivering for, using this platform as part of the delivery on this project. I think looking back at Iran and mainland China, the immediate answer for a lot of us is to go, let's just use a VPN. But for us, is just doing a bit of due diligence and working closely with the security teams at this multinational that we shall not name, was actually, guys, I think it goes inherently against some of your protocols as a company. So we actually came up with a solution that allowed them to attend certain aspects of the event, but we actually almost created like a wrap up for them that allowed them to consume information in a slightly different way. And although we could have got around it technically, sometimes from a diligence piece, it's not necessarily the best way to kind of go about it. So I think being upfront and honest about those challenges with the clients right in the beginning was a starting point for us and helped us to kind of get over that challenge.
Yeah, and I think that what we're learning now is, in some instances, I won't say they've replaced event managers client side, but IT directors or IT leads are as critical a part of the process as the event managers or the event director client side now, right?
Completely.
And so to help deliver all that, what kind of level of support and infrastructure is needed? What do you need to help make that happen?
So I think there's two aspects. So if you look at from a guest speaker journey, so not just necessarily the sort of guests that are attending on the day, but all the speakers that are being brought in live, and almost part of those breakout sessions that you alluded to earlier. It's important that you have a really strong onboarding process with them. This platform will be unfamiliar to them largely, or it was certainly in the first time we delivered an event for them. But it's really important that we do a thorough onboarding process so that technically they understand what they need to do, what tools they have in place. And the more time we spend with them, it just really helps them make use of those tools and kind of your best use. And I think you can even see that journey of the last 3 events we've done with them, of how those speakers or those champions in those breakout rooms have really started to develop and feel more comfortable in getting best use out of platforms. So I think for us, a really thorough onboarding process, even for a team, that's been a development over the last 6 months in particular. And I think that's the first sort of aspect. The second piece is on the actual day. Look, IT causes trouble. There's no two ways about it. When we were just kind of, starting the Zoom meeting, we kind of naturally said to ourselves that, how do we check audio, and we had to check all those levels. IT has issues. It's really important that you have, or the attendees feel that they have a face that they can link up to, be it pre-event, it might be just an email with a heightened support to help people get onto the platform and troubleshoot that process. Then when they're in the platform, getting into those breakout sessions, I can't hear audio, I can't see myself in the screen, my computer's gone blank, my computer's not working. We kind of created streams to help with that process. And hand on heart, the people that we had in platform doing the support, for me, it was more important about the personality around that person in place. They may not necessarily have the best IT they had a really strong base and founding in, but they weren't a traditional IT professional. It was more to go, okay, Chris, I see you've got some issues. Let me take you through a few troubleshooting steps. Let's kind of get around it. And I may not be able to solve it. But if, for instance, you can't get into the breakout room, do me a favor, drop me your email address. I'll get the recording of that breakout session. Again, permissions from client, making sure we can share that to kind of get best use of getting it out. So it was making them really feel comfortable, saying, look, give me 5 minutes. We've escalated with your internal security team. But really making them feel comfortable in the space to go that IT issues are going to happen. There's no two ways about it. It's just helping that attendee journey, get over them and manage it carefully.
And I think that's a key point, right, in terms of making sure that our teams had a decent knowledge of what the kind of problems could be. So, test and rehearse. And precisely to your point, customer service is a key part of what we do. But in the old world, it may have been you had 4 or 5 key people client side that you were talking to, the event director, the key speakers, as and when they came on stage, and maybe a handful of kind of core delegates. Whereas now, in essence, once you have a digital help desk function and a chat function, you almost have to respond to any delegate that has an issue almost immediately. Yeah. So you need to ensure that you have the right number of people in place to do that with the right amount of knowledge. They don't need to be IT experts to your point, Ross, but the right mentality to be able to instantly jump on it. Because again, the flip side to say something like the chat functionality or a help desk is people expect an answer immediately. And what was lovely, I think, about one of the events we ran recently as well, is whilst we were able to help answer some of the technical challenges that people were facing with the platform, actually, a lot of the other delegates were then helping their colleagues course correct. They were jumping and saying, oh, Ross, if you tried doing this, or actually, for whatever reason, it's defaulting to the high-res broadcast version every time you come back to the main stage. So just reset it. And it was really lovely to see that, obviously, without, we were still doing our job, clearly, but it was just great to see, because inadvertently, we're creating a sense of team building and collaboration amongst the delegates. But I think that's been a key learning for us, right? Making sure that you have the right number of people on hand, identify where those troubleshooting moments are most likely to happen. Obviously, you can't always spot it, but identify where they're likely to happen and make sure you've got enough people primed and ready from an event team perspective to jump on them.
Absolutely.
So Ross, with all that in mind, everything we've discussed, what do we think our predictions are for the future of global events? How do you think they'll evolve? What's going to change now once people get the opportunity to start coming together in person?
Well, apart from face masks, depending what the announcement that comes, face masks and social distancing, the biggest change in the UK that I know is important to a lot of my dear friends over there is that you guys are allowed back in the pub. But back to the topic, I think you're going to see a shift towards a more integrated hybrid model where live events are, to use an example, filled in front of smaller audience and then broadcast to delegates across the world. We know that there is a commercial carbon offset benefit to this. So it should naturally sit as a bolt-on solution to any face-to-face event. I think we know that there is going to be an inherent rush towards face-to-face events, and we're already seeing it. I mean, we've got an incredible sort of pipeline over the next sort of few weeks, let alone the next few months. But I really, really hope that we start to see the value of bringing global audiences more connected to traditional live experiences. I think even if you use an automotive as an example, where you are launching a car in UK and to a UK market, you could kind of, the reach to get that, even if it's purely from an interest perspective. One example that I use as an example is Audi. Their Singaporean team they've got a fantastic content team. I've got no interest in buying an Audi out of Singapore by any stretch of the imagination, but just to kind of to build that brand's value proposition, as a global presence. I think just that bolt-on piece of just getting a far bigger reach to face-to-face events is going to add value.
So reach is one point, absolutely. And I think you mentioned or you touched on sustainability there too, in terms of the carbon offsetting. So how much will sustainability drive decision making for global event organizers and multinationals moving forward?
I think, Chris, the sustainability drive, we've spoken about a lot within our industry, but I think it's going to start becoming a client prerequisite. As brands and consumers in particular, place a greater importance in the use of sort of renewable resources. We as an industry have to take this into account in delivery. Just to give you an example, we're in the current throes of scoping a project, and it's based on the Hudson River in New York and London. And it's a PR stunt with a clear message of zero emissions. Now that message has to translate to our delivery methodology. So we have subsequently run a carbon offsetting program and audit as part of the scope of works.
That's incredible. And I think that there's one element that's also, I think, really, really interesting for me, especially, is how we can ensure that event content, especially for internal corporate events, is better integrated into clients' learning and development programs. So, we always talk about, and this is more, I guess, sustainability from a business, a learning and development perspective, right? But we always talk about how events can have a longer lasting reach than just a one-off big event for the client or for the organization. But actually, now we know we're pre-filming some content or we're filming live content. How can we then package that content up post-event and feed it into a considered learning development program for the client? So actually not just working with the marketing team or the event team, but also working with the HR team to say, well, we've got these people talking about these topics and getting this insight and feedback from your own employees. How can we package that up into a mini set of masterclasses? So the content has a longer shelf life, but actually continues to add value after the event. And that's something, I'm really passionate about. And we're talking to a lot of clients about, again, how we can help shape the content pre-event so it has this longer life post-event as well, and actually can have a wider impact. Because again, those nuggets of content that can be filmed can be shared with that organization anywhere in the world, right? Completely. And it becomes a snackable piece of content, a 5-minute training piece on a particular aspect of the business that ordinarily they might not have access to. And that for me is really important.
I think the one example, Chris, that with the one client, the aeronautical and space company that we've been working with, they've been a really sort of success story about this, and kind of we've delivered 4 events for them now, and they were one in particular, like the multinational that we're referring to, of the journey from concept to first delivery was hard, and they have just seen the benefits time after each event and grown in confidence as a company to kind of take that more sort of strategic and long-term approach, and hopefully get to your dream of creating that Netflix series.
Well, exactly, and I think, if we have to summarize, because we could talk this all day, for me, kind of post-COVID, successful event companies, certainly working for delivering global events, will really mark this shift from production delivery to strategic consultancy that's supported by production expertise. So, rather than going in and doing one excellent event and then walking away until the next big event providers are able to use their experience and expertise in driving engagement to influence clients' long-term objectives over the course of a year or several years. And I actually think that's the opportunity that COVID has given the event industry. And that's something that I know we both feel very passionate about.
Cool. Well, Chris, listen, thank you so much for everything over the past few months. So obviously not to keep this too emotional for the lack of the audience. We are now going to kind of show you a case study that we've been referring to a lot. So yeah, and then we'll see you back in 3 minutes where we can answer some questions.
We are so pleased to have you all here for this, our first virtual IT conference, Summit 2021.
We need to empower people, help them see the value of data, presenting it in a usable and logical format.
We will be hosting our Summit 2021 from this fantastic stage.
For agility and innovation, we'll bring more proactive and forward-thinking ideas to the business.
We need to think carefully. We need to think carefully about the shortcuts we can afford to take.
Cybercrime is increasing, and we need to ensure that we stay vigilant.
Well, first of all, I absolutely made the right decision coming here. One of the things that comes across very readily with everyone I've talked to is the passion for the company.
This is what we want, to become a committed and trusted partner at all levels of the organization. We need to provide simple and effective solutions.
Our expo area is filled with exhibition booths that are hosted by different IT teams and functions, all of whom play a vital role in supporting business.
She's fantastic. Wow,
yeah.
Impressive.
As they mentioned in their talk, it is now your turn to provide input.
I am here to talk about driving our success with digital technologies.
I think it was excellent, interactive, very thought-provoking actually.
So I think it is very important to get people together in the format that is available to us right now, which is the virtual format. It is very important to create that sense of team and relationship and interaction. I think virtual events are here to stay. They bring value of getting people together. We can meet more often as bigger teams.
Well, that was a fantastic session, guys. So much information there. I don't even know where to begin, but I am deciding I think the poll would probably be a sensible place to start. So we asked everyone, what do you think is going to be the biggest change to global events? 25% of our audience think logistical challenges. Sustainability is the view that 21% of the audience holds. Building teams in the right places, 17%. But the biggest issue, 36%, more reliant on hybrid. So that sort of ties in very nicely with what you were saying, Ross, earlier on. Hybrid, the integrated experience is going to be absolutely crucial going forward. Now, guys, I'm delighted to say that we've got some questions that have come in. Now, who we direct them to is going to be a bit of a lottery. So I think we'll dedicate about 8 to 9 minutes, I think, of question time. Ross, I'm going to start with you if I can. We've got a question here from Grace, and she says, do you think hybrid events will prove to be just an immediate reaction to the pandemic? There are reports of digital fatigue circling. Can we ever replace desire for face-to-face interaction?
That's a very good question, and I think it's one that we're going to be answering for a long time still. And the proof will be in the next 12 months. I really hope that we can get it right, that there is this blend and there is this mix. I think naturally, I alluded to on my last point that we are going to have there's a hangover, and there's this massive desire to have face-to-face interaction. And I think there will be a period where that's the key focus. But getting the reach out, go back to my point, you make people, just use the UK isn't the only, the only market that is returning. It's pretty much the US and the UK, parts of Europe that are returning back to normality. But the rest of the world are going to be in that space for quite a while. So big brands that are trying to expand in the likes of Africa, I use it obviously as an example, it'll be important to kind of get that reach space out. So I think we will, I really think that the mix will be around, but I think there will be initials, particularly in the UK, a rush for face-to-face engagement, and then an integrated part, maybe not on as big a level as all we've seen in the last 12 months, but certainly like an integrated space that'll happen over the next, we will see really, but yeah, I think that's my
I'm going to follow up with my own question on that, because I think, we don't need to be scared by this, but my view, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we need to sort of maybe get away from this idea that a virtual delegate and a real live delegate necessarily have to have the same experience. At the moment, I bring it up because at the moment the UEFA Championships are on, and the European Championships are on. It's great fun. The other day, over the last few days, we've had 60,000 fans in the stadium. They're getting a very much a live experience. They're there. Yeah, I'm sitting at home on the armchair watching Gary Lineker and other pundits give me a completely different experience about the same event. So I'm sitting at home, but I've got access to so much more information. So the hybrid event is nothing new. We're watching it on TV all the time.
Completely. Yeah, really, really, really good point.
I actually think, for what it's worth, I'm quite excited by the thought there might be a smaller hybrid events that somehow then are kind of broadcast to wider audiences. So, almost smaller mini football matches, if you like, Martin, that then can then be broadcast out to a larger audience. And I think we could well see a shift in that direction. The other thing I think we need to be mindful of is obviously a lot of corporations are changing their structures as well. And I think that will be reflected in events. We don't know how yet. So you take a company like Shopify, a lot of the tech companies have vowed they will never go back to office work again. They don't need to. So what does that mean for us in our industry? Does that mean that actually they'll have a much bigger desire to all meet up in real life because they'll only have a chance to do that once a year at all? Or actually will they translate the purely virtual digital thinking to everything they do? And there are some unanswered questions there. And the reality is I think it will continue to be a combination of live, hybrid and pure digital.
Chris, I've got a question here that I'm going to kind of throw in your direction. What are your thoughts on engaging, a return on investment for stakeholders and measuring? Because I think that's the $1 million question a lot of people have. A lot of people started. I know that it's nothing new really, but everyone's been forced into the digital alternative over the last 18 months. And a lot of people have tried to project those traditional analog commercial measures into a digital space when really that's a square peg round hole, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And that's why and as an industry, we've always thought about this, and we've always tried to flag that conversation with clients, right? We've always said, look, if we're building a stage set for you, or if we're building an exhibition stand for you, we want to build something that can be reused, that has longevity, that can be tailored. And I think it's the same mentality that gets applied to digital events, only around content. So you say, look, if you're paying the money for some good production values, and we're filming delegates who are sharing insights on their business with their colleagues on green screen or on extended reality screens, let's try and ensure that there's some planning that goes into that content so it has longevity and it can feed into a learning and development program long term for the client. And that's where I'm really passionate actually about working with clients to say there's a cost, of course there's a cost, but don't treat it as a one-off hit. Let's try and move away from the old days of a presenter turning up 2 seconds before, handing a USB stick with his presentation and says, here it is. And let's plan what that content is well in advance so it has a lifespan post the event. And that's where I think there's a real opportunity for us in this industry.
Martin, he's just trying to create that Netflix series. That's his dream, really. It's part of his Netflix.
I'm keen to get both of your answers on this one. It's coming from Dave, and it's got an exhibition focus, so it's less content led. Do you have any recommendation for engaging audiences for exhibitions, which is more than just that sort of content exchange? That's really the facilitation of a business conversation, I suppose.
Chris, I'll let you go first.
Thanks. I'll do the Elon Musk 7-second pause while I think of an answer. But again, for me, it's about, just like with the event world, it's about building a degree of anticipation as well for the delegates. So what technology allows us to do is be able to get potential visitors to an exhibition stand pre-registered, obviously, allows us to perhaps understand a little bit about them, allows us to maybe tailor some experiences. If we know, just as brands do in the consumer world, the more you know about a consumer, the more you know about a visitor to your stand, the more you're able to potentially have a suite of content that you can say, oh, hey, Martin, I know that you're especially interested in how we make exhibition stands more engaging. I've prepared some content for you. And only if, obviously, you have a poll and you know that 25% of your audience would be interested in that. But I don't think it's fundamentally different from core marketing principles. Try and understand your audience as best as possible. And then how can you creatively engage them in that space? And the tech allows us to do a lot more around that. But again, do it in a way that's true to your brand, that's true to your business, that's not just using tech for tech's sake.
Ross, do you got anything to add to that, or has Chris pretty much covered it?
Yeah, I think just one point. If I try and use an example, a sports nutrition brand we did a lot of exhibition work for. I'll first of all go with, I think the adaptation to how guys virtually look at exhibitions is maybe not developed to the point it needs to be. You've got to try and create localized experiences for those that are in a different part of the world. The sports nutrition brand that I referred to, it was an exhibition, FIBO, in Cologne. And you want to try and create connection pieces for the audience that can't attend, that can have that experience. So we had a company, a marketeer, that said, look, they were trying to approach all the sort of gyms in and around the country, and they almost had their sort of heads from these gyms attend this exhibition and bring that experience back. So you could now kind of move that forward and have this exhibition experience happening in a localized environment that was connected through a virtual experience. So I think platforms are amazing, and yes, they're really, really good, but you've got to kind of back that exhibition experience. And that's kind of like a traditional consumer exhibition experience. Some of these exhibitions are all about creating meetings. So you straight away see the value in that. Companies aren't having to fly their sales team into an exhibition, because take the sort of carbon offset piece aside, it saves money. So I think trying to understand what the KPIs of the exhibition, and then create an experience, if it's a consumer led or a business led, you can quite easily see the value in that. So that's kind of my one point, just to support Chris's.
Last question then, guys. Do clients always know what they want? I suppose where we're coming from here is that they've now got so much variety. They were conditioned before that. Like I say, for 200 years, the only way you could really get your news was through a daily printed newspaper. And now we hear about, print circulations are down and they're spiraling, it's all bad, doom and gloom. Not at all. The audience is still there. They're just spread out across multiple channels. People can see the news online, through video, on social. The audience size hasn't shrunk at all. So I guess really, in your position, you have to sort of almost be the consultant, guide the brand, guide the client on what the best medium is to achieve whatever their business objective is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that has been the benefit of the last 18 months, is people like us are being brought in earlier into the conversation. Because previously the brief would be, we want a live event for 1,000 people, a corporate event. Whereas now you can ask the questions, say, well, what do you want people to take out from that event? Okay, we want a sense of togetherness and a sense of community. Great. Okay, we'll take that. And then we can start asking the probing questions. So I think they know, with a bit of probing, they know what they want to achieve, but what they don't currently know, unless they're experts in hybrid and virtual events, is how to get there. And that's where we can consult, and that's where we can add value. And again, that's what I think is quite exciting for us now in this industry, because it really elevates it from being, I need you to produce an event, to I need you to create an experience. The end goal, the end aim is usually still the same, but once you understand that, you can build what the event experience looks like and build a value proposition around that to deliver.
Absolutely. Ross, have you got anything to add to that?
No, Chris pretty much nailed it.
Good stuff.
For once, Ross, thank you.
On that bombshell, then, it is time to bring our event to a conclusion. Our sincere thanks to everyone who's made the effort to join us this afternoon. And, of course, a massive thank you to Chris and Ross. A recording of this video will be made available post-event. Have a great afternoon.